Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled that we're together, and we had a wonderful experiential meditation out on the ocean yesterday, which reflected a lot of the topics that we've been studying here. But when we were out on the ocean with the sky above us and the vast horizons, there was a different experience. It was not quite so mind only or intellectual in the teachings. So we're continuing today, and now we are at the section of the Heart Sutra that is, I'm going to read it to you. That is why emptiness, body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness are not separate self-entities. The 18 realms of phenomena, the 6 sense organs, the 6 sense objects, and the 6 consciousnesses are also not separate self-entities. And essentially, it's looking at the emptiness of the skandhas, which we've already covered, but looking at them again in a more detailed way, and it's a little more inclusive. So essentially, we're taking the present moment and we're saying everything that can be perceived and the whole process of perception is bound by emptiness, and we can look at it through exactly how the senses function, and we can look at it through every conceivable meditative state that one could achieve. All is bound by emptiness. But it's most helpful for us to look at it in terms of our own experience of the present moment. And this whole passage continues with, this is the perception aspect, then it's followed by the wheel of interdependent origination, and then followed by the 4 noble truths, and just flatly saying all of this is bound by emptiness. So this was shocking. This was shocking, and it's one of the reasons Karl Brunholzer calls it the Heart Attack Sutra. So if you can imagine, when the Buddha first taught, he really was emphasizing in emptiness the idea of a non-self, the non-inherent, separately existing self. And he was doing that in the context of the wheel of interdependent origination and the 4 noble truths. And then all of a sudden he says, everything is bound, everything I've taught you is bound by emptiness. And you can imagine all of these people had gotten complacent because karma was explained so clearly, and how we create karma was explained so clearly. The 4 noble truths were explained so clearly. And then he's introducing a whole new area of emptiness, that all of this is bound by emptiness. And it said that many of the bodhisattvas just fell over at that point. So we can take this at a lot of different levels, and I'm going to go into perception in a few minutes. But one of the things that this is saying is all of these explanations of Buddhism, the explanation of ground, path, and fruition, are presented in stages of understanding. And as you are understanding one stage, another stage is presented, and you have to let go of that whole first stage. And then as soon as you think you understand the second stage, you're invited to let that go, and another stage is presented. So this gives us great flexibility of mind, and the teaching that we're not going to understand this conceptually. We're going to clarify the nature of our minds and what we're perceiving until it's so subtle that we can let go of a conceptual explanation. And that's when we open to the vast emptiness. But we so desire to explain everything to ourselves conceptually that as soon as we have a framework, we hold on to it so tightly. And the Heart Sutra is saying, no, this is about letting go. It's helpful, and then it's not helpful anymore. You have to let it go. And we often say it's like climbing a ladder. You have to let go of the first step in order to rise up on the second step. So going back to, in other translations of the Heart Sutra, it says, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind consciousness. So you might recognize the Zen Heart Sutra is presented like that, and the Tibetan translation is presented like that. Thich Nhat Hanh just says it a little more simply, that the mind, the consciousness, the body, and are not separate self-entities. And my favorite example for this is using a flashlight. So we're talking about subject and object. And you could say that if the flashlight comes on, it illuminates the object, and the light from the flashlight makes contact with the object. So in order for the subject and the object to be in contact with each other, to have a perception, first of all, we have to have a functioning flashlight. So this would be the eyes, the ears, the nose. But the eyes, the ears, and the nose, etc., are just physical matter. They have no capacity for any kind of awareness, perception, or thought. So then there's the understanding that within the organ, within the eye organ, say, is the eye faculty. And we could say, all right, that's like the batteries. The batteries of the flashlight allow the flashlight to turn on and off, to actually move towards the glass. And you can understand that in the sense of, let's say if you were blind, you would still have an eye organ, but the eye organ wouldn't have an eye faculty. And then the eye faculty makes it possible for the eye sense consciousness, like the light bulb with the whole functioning flashlight, to illuminate the glass of tea. These then are still only non-conceptual information. The eye consciousness transmits to the mind consciousness. There's something that's orange, there's something that's tall. The eye consciousness sees shape and color. It presents this to the mind consciousness as we call it an isolate, a thought within the brain that's an approximation of what the eye consciousness is contacting. And the mental consciousness then says, oh, this is a glass of tea. I'm thirsty, I'm gonna drink the tea. This is good tea, this is bad tea. I wish it had more sugar, I wish it had lemon, etc., etc., etc. So the point of this is, if it's all interdependent of all of these different parts, then there is no separate eye consciousness, eye faculty functioning. It's all dependent on all of these parts, and therefore it fits the definition of emptiness that we've been working with, which is interbeing, interdependent, interpenetrating, impermanent, and interconnected. So what's the usefulness of understanding perception? The usefulness of understanding perception, the usefulness of seeing the emptiness of all of our sense consciousnesses and our mental consciousness is, first of all, to see how impermanent and transitory everything is. It's a flash, and then we get a flash of, let's say, the taste of the tea. We might have a flash of the temperature of the tea. We get all these flashes of information, each one coming up and dissolving immediately as the next bit of information comes to our mental consciousness. And it's also useful to see in the same way that all of our sense consciousness and our mental consciousness is bound by emptiness, then we can substitute anything. All of our experience is bound by emptiness, which means it is transient, impermanent, changing, and it's also not direct. So it's created by our own mental consciousness that assigns good, bad, like, dislike, terrible, in essence, a construction and artificial, often created by our karmic history. And when we are functioning and we have a reaction or a response to something, then we can look at all of these interdependent parts and examine it to say, is this what I think it is? So, for instance, this is yummy iced tea made with my favorite kind of tea. But if I were to give this to a Tibetan, a traditional Tibetan, they might not like it. They might perceive any cold drink as being unhealthy. The taste might not suit them. Whereas if a Tibetan offered me their favorite yak butter tea made with rancid yak butter, I would have a taste and I would have an aversion. So this experience that we think is quantifiable and has some sort of truth, it only has our made up reactions based on our karmic history. So this tastes good to me, but it wouldn't necessarily taste good to a Tibetan. I would find a cold drink refreshing, and a Tibetan would find a cold drink unhealthy. These are all thoughts after the fact. It has nothing to do with the direct perception of this object. It's all constructed after the fact with nothing direct. The taste is only sweet, salty, bitter, astringent, cold. No, cold is the sense of touch. Anyway, there's 6 basic tastes. And then we put together, oh, this is the best iced tea I've ever had, or this is the worst iced tea we've ever had. So when we start to see how flexible everything is, then every aspect of our lives starts to be seen as illusory and not so definitely good and definitely bad. As things become illusory, then we lose the strong attraction and strong aversion. So another example of this is Lord Jigten Sumgön's mother. And she was a wise woman in her village, and her neighbor came over one day, and the neighbor was deeply grieving the loss of her husband. And Lord Jigten Sumgön's mother said, I'm so sorry, and your grief is so strong. All you have to do is simply think about something else. And, to our Western ears, that can sound very insensitive, and it certainly isn't the way we tenderly take care of grief now in our culture, but it's presenting a basic truth in that your mind consciousness is thinking of something, the death of your loved one, and then going into deeper and deeper and deeper grief. And if you change the subject, if you change the thought that the mind is perceiving, then that deeper grief can't keep arising. We can see this because there's no inherently existing grief. It's bound by impermanence. So we were all chatting yesterday and talking about all the toddlers in our families. And one of the things, that we were sharing with each other, we're living in these troubled times, but all I have to do is get a picture of my grandniece who's 3, and all of a sudden, my mental experience is different. I'm contacting a different object, and I have, since I'm not the mother, I don't have to deal with any of the problems. I only have a joy response when I see that photograph. So the Heart Sutra is looking at the impermanence and the emptiness being interconnected, dependent on many parts in order to function, interpenetrating, interconnected, all of these moving parts, and saying, if you change one of the parts, it all falls to pieces, the mental construction that you've made. So let's test this in our own environment. Select an object and just contemplate. You're looking at something, but your eye consciousness is only taking in color and shape. So I can look at a bouquet of flowers, but what my eye consciousness takes in is color and shape. This then becomes an object for my mental consciousness, which says, oh, really beautiful roses. Oh, the hydrangea are dying, that's bad. Oh, the plume of burgundy, I think it's an amaranth flower. It matches the altar cloth. All of this is a mental construction that's indirect and after the fact. So select an object in your environment and watch the construction and then watch the deconstruction. Let's take a few minutes to do this. So there's no separate I. There's no I that is seeing. There's an intricate set of processes that come together and spark. The sets of sense organs, sense objects, and sense consciousnesses are called in Tibetan ayatanas and dhatus, meaning they come together, these moving parts come together and they spark. So without all of them functioning and meeting, there's no spark. And this momentary spark is the impermanence. They meet and spark. They spark further processes that like, dislike, like a lot, really hate, aversion, attraction, that sets the whole wheel of samsara into motion, is a response to an illusory process of all of these functions creating an image, not a direct contact, but an image in our mind, which means we don't have to hold on so hard to it. There's a practice in the illusory nature practice where you go out to a place where there's echoes and you yell insults. So if somebody were really yelling at you all these insults, you might be really triggered. But when you're just there and you're yelling and hearing sounds, you know that you're interpreting the sounds. And you're creating the meaning, you're creating the anger, the triggers, etc. It's just sounds that your hearing consciousness presents to your mental consciousness. Your mental consciousness interprets a word and gets offended. So if you just let sounds flow, one sound is not better than another sound, it's just sound. And you can stop holding on so tightly to the meaning that you interpret and create. Contact a sound in your environment. Watch how quickly you sort and identify it and give meaning to it. I have aversion to the sound of my refrigerator, but I love the sound of leaves. Totally creating, interpreting sounds that are brought to my mental consciousness by my hearing sense consciousness, and then interpreted. we build a sense of righteousness based on what we see as our perception of what we believe is a reality. Without understanding how much of it is interpretation. When we look at how confident we are in what we experience, if you've ever gone back and read a letter that upset you from 10 years ago, and you wonder, oh, that really doesn't say what I thought it said. I don't see the same interpretation 10 years later. Or if there was some sort of inherent truth, imagine holding a pencil. We see it as something that functions, something you can write with. We're absolutely convinced it's a pencil. But if we dropped it, our dog would see it as a toy. There'd be no sense of, this is a pencil that I can write with. It's yum, here's a stick to play with. So the invitation is to stop grasping so tightly. Whether it's to our perceptions or to the building blocks of philosophy that help take us to the next stage, but then we need to let go of. We talk about sometimes the Heart Sutra as going to the other shore, and that the Dharma is like a raft. All these wonderful explanations that are so clarifying. But finally, we have to let go of the raft. So everything is loosening. Okay, let's open for discussion. I'll say a dedication for the folks online. Bodhicitta, excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher.